Sup, guys? It's Toad back with you once again. A few hours after I was with you last night. Thanks for those who tuned into the Better Off Dead NFL divisional round show last night. Divisional round of the playoffs. So if you missed that, go check that out. I have one play, which is in tomorrow's NFL slate. I gave out opinions on all four of the games, all four sides, all four totals. So go check that out. I might just rehash it real quick at the end of this show. Hopefully the show doesn't take forever. Usually these college basketball stuff, man, it takes forever. It's like there's so much going on with college basketball. It's crazy. I think this show was like 2 hours yesterday because we got a huge college basketball slate. We got a big NHL slate. It's Saturday. And college basketball, I got 9 plays because I would say I can't help myself, but I think I'm actually being reserved here because I'm actually stopping myself from playing even more plays here. So, all right, let's get into it here. Let's talk about college basketball here. I'm going to talk about probably all the big games and then try to hit some of my other leans here. Alabama, Kentucky, first game up basically at noon Eastern is going to be the biggest game on the slate. Number 4 against number 8. I still think Kentucky's a little bit overranked right now, though, man. I don't think they're actually quite a top 10 team. Both of these teams like to play super fast tempo, so Alabama's not going to be thrown out of their preferred tempo here. Both teams like to run it. Alabama probably goes even faster than Kentucky does. So my quick read on this is that I lean to Alabama. I mean, there isn't really that much of a situation here, although Alabama did just lose to Ole Miss. So they may have been in a sandwich spot. They may have been looking ahead to this, coming off a big win over Texas A&M as well. So I think they're going to bring it and show up against Kentucky. Kentucky, a couple of big wins in a row against Mississippi State and Texas A&M. So facing a third straight ranked team, I mean, they will show up, but I just think that the edge goes to the better of these two teams, which is Alabama. Kentucky is up from 2 to 2.5, but we do see 84% of the cash on Alabama and only 63% of the tickets. Excuse me. So I think Alabama is getting more of the money than the tickets here. So I think that would be the way to look in that game. Charles, what's up, man? Good morning to you as well. Tim, what's up, man? Your base untuned. You said you hate basketball, though, and this is going to mostly be basketball. My football show was last night, man, where I talked about the Detroit Lions game last night. So if you missed that, go check that out. Houston at UCF. I still think Houston is like a top 5 team in the country, man, and they're ranked 10th. They're still undefeated in the Big 12 now. I mean, they're obviously turning it on. I mean, they lost 3 games. I think at least one of them was in overtime. All 3 of their losses were to good teams and really close games. This Houston team is definitely still for real. I think they're still a little bit under the radar here, even though they are starting to crush it in Big 12 play. Houston would be the only way I would look in this game, even though it's kind of a weird spot having to go to Central Florida. I think both of these teams were in the Big 12 last year, so I think Houston may have had to go there last year. I don't know, but Houston is the better team here. They're sitting at a 13-point favorite, 64% of tickets, 83% of the cash. I think the public might look at this and just think that's way too big a number with teams. I mean, Houston only has a 1-game advantage, really, record-wise over UCF. So I think to the public eye, I think the line looks crazy, but Houston is just that much better of a team. And in UCF, I think they've been traveling around quite a bit. They were just in Arizona. Now they're coming back to Florida before they have to go out again to Iowa. I mean, this travel situation, this is crazy amounts of travel for UCF. It's just wild, man, with these stupid conference realignments. So I would look for Houston in that one. Hutch made you go to bed early. Aiden Hutchinson, is he like in your house right now or something? Because he's hurt, so I don't know where he's at right now. Creighton is at UConn. UConn ranked 14th in the country. UConn is starting to kind of turn it on again. I mean, they're definitely not like that championship caliber team they were the last couple of years, but they are still good. Creighton is still a little bit down this year, so I think UConn probably is the way to look here. They're up from 7.5 to 8, but they do have 63% of the tickets and 88% of the cash over on Creighton. So Creighton does look like they're actually getting some of the money, but I don't know, man. Creighton having to travel to the East Coast, always a little bit of an issue. UConn bounced back from that loss to Villanova, that tough game, and they beat Georgetown, but really they didn't beat them by that much. And that Georgetown team, as we saw last night, is still probably not really that good. I'm not saying they're going to, I mean, they should be, what I am saying is that they should be focused on Creighton here, man, because I don't think they paid that much attention to Georgetown. Creighton, I mean, they're coming off smashing Providence, but I don't think that means that much. Providence, not that good, but now they're having to go back out on the road. Could be a difficult spot. I mean, Creighton has not been very good on the road this year. Losing to Alabama close. They did play well in that game. They got annihilated by Georgetown on the road. That doesn't look good. Close game against Marquette, though. So they're 0-3 on the road, though. So I don't know. I don't think I would trust Creighton really in that spot. Georgia Tech and Florida State. Florida State down from 11 to 10.5. This is crazy that Georgia Tech, I guess, is just this bad because I think Florida State is nowhere near as good as their record looks, but they are. It looks like Georgia Tech is taking some of the money here. 67% of the tickets on Florida State, 56% of the cash on Georgia Tech. So, I mean, I don't really have that much of a read on this otherwise, but Florida State is coming off beating Pitt, actually, though. So they just played a couple of the better teams in the ACC, in Clemson and Pitt. This ACC is terrible this year. Like, Duke is just gonna run through this conference. This conference is terrible, but Clemson and Pitt are like the other two decent teams in this conference right now. And Florida State just played both of them and just beat Pitt, which was a pretty nice win. So I would agree with leaning to taking the points with Georgia Tech in this one, but I mean, they are coming off playing Clemson as well, but lost by 11. Clemson and Pitt's going to be a big game, man. I mean, like I said, those two teams both pretty good in the ACC still, as far as ACC goes at the very least. Pitt has lost 3 in a row, and coming off that loss to Florida State, that was a pretty ugly loss. I mean, you can't blame them for losing to Duke, although they got absolutely annihilated by Duke. So, I mean, you would have expected Pitt to be a little bit more competitive in that game, I think, and they were not. And then that kind of sent them spiraling, I think. But I think this might be the spot where they bounce back. Clemson on a nice little run right now. People are going to look at this and say, oh, Clemson beat Florida State by 20 points and Pitt lost to them by 12. So Clemson has to be the right side here, right? I would hesitate to agree with that. Pitt up from 2.5 to 3 with juice. Oddsmakers telling you these teams are close to even, with Clemson, I guess, being the slightly better team according to oddsmakers. I think it is close. I don't even know which team KenPom has as the better of these two. I think he has them close. Pitt, 52% of tickets, 74% of the cash on Clemson, though. So, I don't know, man. I mean, my read on this would have been to lean to Pitt, though, based on what these teams just did in the last couple of games, and because of the transitive property thing that the public might apply to this with how both of these teams did against Florida State. Virginia's at Louisville, and man, Virginia is so down this year. Louisville is up from 15.5 to 16 with juice, although they're public, 82% of tickets, 64% of the cash, so less of the cash on them, but man, it is a sad state of affairs for Virginia if they're that big of an underdog at Louisville. I don't know what to even say about that game otherwise. I don't know which way I would even lean in that one, man. I mean, I don't want to belabor this, although I am hitting a lot of these games. Virginia just had a close game against SMU. They have been really bad in conference play so far, 1-5 so far. Louisville, 6-1 in conference so far. And beating a couple of the better teams in the conference, too. UNC is actually still pretty good. And they did beat Virginia, though, on the road. So that's one thing where maybe this will be a little bit of road reversal revenge here, where maybe Virginia will be able to get within that number, because it is a big number. So Virginia, with that, a lot of times when you have that second matchup between two conference foes, if the road team won the first matchup, especially if they embarrassed that team on their own floor, that other team will step up for the next game and try to play well against that team on their floor. So that would be the one reason why I could see maybe taking Virginia plus the points there, but obviously no way I'm going to do that. George Mason, George Washington, the battle of the Georges is an interesting game in the A10. The thing about this is that the odds makers are telling you that even though these teams have similar records, George Mason is actually the way better team, up from 8 to 9, 67% of tickets, 99% of the cash on George Washington. I don't know if I agree with, I mean, whenever you see 99%, that's probably not an accurate number. But the problem I have with George Mason, because if you just look at this on the surface, looks like this should be a competitive game, and the public is going to think getting 9.5 points with George Washington looks like a steal, right? So I think the public would kind of want to be on that side, and normally I would be like, well, I want to fade that sentiment because the odds makers are telling you George Mason is the way better team here, which I agree with. That is true. The problem that I have with it is that George Mason, as I was just about to show, they're coming off a big win over Dayton, man. I mean, Dayton is still one of the better teams in this conference, even though they're down at 1-3 in conference right now. I expect Dayton to start kind of turning it around. I still think Dayton is like a top 4 or 5 team in this conference, and that's what George Mason's coming off of. That was a big win, 7.5 point underdog. So that oddsmaker is telling you that Dayton is actually pretty good. If they were a 7.5 point favorite against George Mason in that one, although it was at Dayton. And George Mason does have St. Bonaventure up next as well, so that's a big game as well. But not that they're going to overlook George Washington. I mean, George Washington's been pretty good this season as well, record-wise at the very least. But George Washington, I would not want to try to play George Mason in a spot like this where they're coming off a big win. George Washington just lost to Duquesne. As I said, I liked Duquesne in that spot, and I kind of wish I played it. That was one of my almost plays. It like almost made my card, and Duquesne was like getting 4.5 points there. That was the right side. My lean was right on that one. This Duquesne team, I mean, because of their start to the season, they're flying way under the radar right now. This Duquesne team is actually not bad. They actually are almost as good as George Washington, and their record would make you think otherwise. But George Washington played a really weak out of conference schedule, and Duquesne did not. So that's really what's going on there. So I do not want to play this game. I mean, situationally, it would almost be a lean against George Mason, but because it's like kind of a misleading spread there, like that would make me want to take George Mason. So very conflicting indicators on that one. Next up, I do have a play, and I will say that a lot of my plays today, I'm agreeing with the market, but the market has shifted a lot. So it's kind of like that trade-off between, well, the market is giving you information. So when you see the market move, that does mean that there is substantial money coming in to move that line. So you're agreeing with where like the professional money is, but if you're waiting to see that money come in, then you're taking kind of the worst number. But I'm taking some of the worst numbers, which kind of sucks today because a few of them are right on the edge as far as like the 7, which is kind of a key number in college basketball or in basketball because it's the 3-score threshold where teams stop intentionally fouling. But that is what I'm doing here. I'm going to play Georgia plus the 6.5. Auburn's number 1 in the country, man. I know. And I agree. I think they are the best team in the country, but I don't like the spot for Auburn here. Georgia, number 23. Georgia proving that I don't think they're really a fluke here. I think Georgia is legitimately a pretty decent team here. And look what Auburn is coming off of, man. So what happened is they barely got by South Carolina, and Johnny Broome, their top scorer, their best player by far, who contributes like 30-something% of their scoring, basically, he got hurt, and he's not back yet. I think he's going to miss this game, and he may be back for the game against Tennessee. So, I mean, Ken Pom does have Auburn winning this game by like 10 points, but again, you have to factor in Broome. The 6.5 is a little bit low for my liking, but I just like the situation, man. So I'm giving up a couple of points of value. Unfortunately, I am doing that in a couple of games today, and hopefully it does not bite me in the ass. But Auburn, so what happened, Broome got hurt in the South Carolina game. Then that put them in the injured player theory spot in the next game. So I was saying they just escaped against an inferior opponent, South Carolina. Now they're playing a good team, Mississippi State, and it's the injured player theory with that first game with that injured player not there. You know what I always say, that you get value on that team. Auburn was down to a 7.5 point favorite, in that game, where they should have been like a double-digit favorite in that game if they had Broome there, which they did not. So I was saying you're getting a lot of value on Auburn in this one, and they're going to step it up for that first game without Broome. And they did, and they got a huge win, annihilating Mississippi State. Easy win for me on Auburn in that one. But now they have to go on the road. They have to face Georgia, and this is going to be the second game without Broome. And a lot of times if that team does really well in that injured player theory spot and they play really well, a lot of times they take a big step back in the next game because they get really comfortable thinking, hey, we just won easy without him. We don't need him. We're going to go in and win this game easily. So I think they might be a little bit overconfident coming into this. It's a road game, and they got Tennessee up next, although I know it's not for a week. It's not until next Saturday, but still, I mean, that is a big game on the horizon for SEC supremacy, with those teams basically being considered two of the top 4 teams in the SEC at the very least, maybe even arguably the top 2. So I think it's a sandwich spot. I don't like it for Auburn. And Auburn, when they've gone on the road, I mean, they've struggled a little bit on the road this season. I mean, they lost to Duke. I mean, I'm not going to blame them for that. That's a tough, tough opponent there. Oh, my God. I apologize for being sick as well, man. I'm dying here. Then they barely got by Texas, and they barely got by South Carolina, although I know Broome went down in that game. But Auburn has not been nearly as good in these true road games. So I like all of that as far as fading Auburn. Georgia, as far as they're concerned, they're coming off getting smoked by Tennessee. And, I mean, yeah, it's Tennessee. It's a big game. It's a good team. But Georgia got drilled by Tennessee. So I think Georgia being back home, I think it's going to be a better spot for them. And look what Georgia's done at home, man. I mean, they beat Kentucky at home. That was a huge win. They beat Oklahoma, although Oklahoma's not as good as we think they are. So Georgia was actually a 7-point favorite in that game, but still nice win there at home. So Georgia, I mean, they've definitely been better at home. They beat St. John's at home as well. They did lose to Marquette, but Marquette's really good. So Georgia definitely been better at home, as expected, really. And Auburn's been somewhat worse on the road as well. So I like Georgia plus the points here. I'm taking it. Auburn's down from 7.5 to 5.5 now, or 6 basically. 62% of the tickets, 77% of the cash on Georgia. It looks like the money is indeed coming in on the Georgia side, so I will grab it. Unfortunately, not getting the 7 here. I don't think the 7 is going to reappear. It looks like it's probably mostly 6s out there right now, but I'm playing the spot. Yeah, skip the Georges. The pulled pork sandwich spot, which one? Is there a North Carolina sandwich? Did I miss a North Carolina sandwich? What are we talking about here? I think there is one on the slate today somewhere in the ACC. I don't know, but I call the North Carolina, I call the pulled pork sandwich spot. Kansas State at Kansas is a big game today. I mean, obviously, it's a huge rivalry game, although Kansas State is pretty down this year, so Kansas is a huge favorite here. But is it the right spot for Kansas? I don't know, because Kansas was kind of rolling along. They hadn't really faced any of the greater teams yet in the Big 12, and they faced basically their main competition for supremacy in the Big 12, besides Houston, obviously. I mean, Houston, actually Arizona is definitely a threat as well, but Iowa State, really, really good. Iowa State sitting atop the Big 12, one-loss team. Big game for Kansas. They're on the road at Iowa State, and they lost that game. So that might be the type of loss that kind of hangs you over into the next game. And if Kansas had this Houston game coming up next, I would say this is a pretty bad sandwich spot, and I would be looking to fade Kansas here. As it stands right now, I won't play it, but I do think you could maybe see Kansas in a bit of a hangover spot. Kansas State, though, was one of my plays the other day, and they just played Texas Tech pretty close. It was a good spot to take Kansas State in that one, and that one hit for me the other night. Kansas State plus the points covered for me there. So Kansas State is coming off a nice game, but it does look like the money is in agreement with me as far as me saying that I think Kansas is in a bit of a hangover spot here, and I do think Kansas is maybe slightly a little bit overrated as well. Kansas down from 17.5 to 15 here. 63% of the tickets on them. I mean, the public is only going to come in one way in this one and lay points with Kansas, even if it is a huge number. But 60% of the cash on Kansas State. And you know, Kansas State considers themselves to be the little brother in the state of Kansas. So you know Kansas State steps it up for games when they play Kansas, man. I mean, that's just the way it is. Crazy things kind of happen sometimes in these rivalry games. So I would lean to taking the points with Kansas State in that one, but not a strong lean. Oh, the South teams, yeah. The pulled pork, I consider pulled pork to definitely be like a North Carolina thing with that vinegary barbecue sauce. I am a fan of it. I like all different kinds of barbecue, baby. I would lean against Wagner. Wagner is coming off a big win, an upset win on the road against Central Connecticut, who are basically the best team in the Northeast Conference right now, which, I mean, I know this is a totally crap conference, but still, that was a big win for Wagner as 10.5-point underdogs. They went in and they beat Central Connecticut. Big win for them. Central Connecticut had a really bad shooting game in that one. Big win. They're coming off that, and they do have St. Francis, PA up next, and they're a team that's at least above Wagner in the standings in the Northeast Conference. But do I want to actually come in and play Mercyhurst, who's a team that's at the bottom of the conference and new to Division I? I don't really, but the only way that I would look in this game would be to fade Wagner in this one. Mercyhurst is playing a third straight road game, though, so it's not really the easiest spot for them either. But I believe that Mercyhurst is, well, actually, I don't know. It looks like Wagner is actually up a little bit from 5.5 with reduced juice to 5.5. So it looks like maybe some of the money actually came in on Wagner. When I saw this earlier, I thought the line was down to like Wagner 4.5, and it looks like maybe it's gone back up a little bit. But these are two really bad teams, like bottom 30 teams in all of Division I. So I don't want to muck around in that game. So I'm just going to pass. And then I would lean to UMBC against Maine. UMBC is coming off a real ugly loss at home to UNH. I mean, no way UMBC should have lost this game as a 13.5-point favorite. Absolutely ridiculous. UNH is a terrible team. UMBC was actually getting blown out of this game in various parts of it, too. Just, I don't know how that even happened. Just ridiculous. UNH, absolutely a terrible team. One of the bottom, like, probably 10 or 15 teams in all of Division I. Now UMBC gets Maine, and Maine, on the surface, this looks like you'd want to take Maine because UMBC is laying a couple of points at home. The odds makers are telling you Maine is the slightly better team, but UMBC is up from a pick'em to 2. I don't see the percentages yet on this, but the line has moved in the direction of UMBC, and I agree with it. It looks like a kind of a strange line, seeing the team with the worst record being a favorite, although, again, they're not quite getting home court advantage here, so oddsmakers still telling you Maine, slightly better team. Maine, I mean, they're not really coming off of anything huge, though. I mean, they beat NJIT, who's a terrible team, but the thing is, if you saw that game, it was hilarious what happened in that game. Maine, one of their best players, AJ Lopez, I think is his name, something like that. He was raining threes down in that game, and after one of the threes that he hit, he started taunting and shushing the crowd, and like the entire crowd at that game was like 8-year-olds on a field trip. That's the crowd that NJIT gets, man. They cannot even come close to selling out their college basketball games, man. Nobody goes to see NJIT. I mean, they're a terrible team. So absolutely hilarious that Maine, one of their players was taunting a bunch of 8-year-olds. It's just so funny. But I mean, I don't think Maine is really in the worst spot coming up of that. However, it is a second straight road game, and they got UMass Lowell up next in 5 days, and that is a big game. UMass Lowell is one of the teams that could potentially win this conference. So that is a big game up against UMass Lowell up next. So it is a spot where I would look for UMBC to bounce back after that real ugly loss. So that's the way I would lean in that one. Not a play for me. Xavier is at Marquette. I mean, this is an interesting one. Pretty decent Big East matchup. Marquette's up from 9.5 to 9.5 with juice. Some money coming in on Marquette. 60% of tickets, 66% of the cash on Marquette. I mean, I don't really see much of a reason to look otherwise here. I mean, look at Marquette. They're coming off almost losing to DePaul. So, I mean, I think Marquette was not really paying attention to DePaul. So I do think Marquette is going to be refocused after almost losing to the worst team in the conference. So I do expect focus from Marquette. They only have Seton Hall up next. Not a big game with the way they've been playing. Xavier coming off kind of a decent win over Villanova. I mean, obviously Xavier is still going to be focused going to play Marquette. But, sorry, I'm turning into RFK again here with my voice. But, yeah, I would lean to Marquette in that one. I mean, they're the better team. They're kind of in a refocused spot. So, not a spot where I would want to fade Marquette. Winthrop and UNC Asheville, that's going to be a good game between two good teams in the Big South. Winthrop has flipped from a 2-point dog to a 1-point favorite. So it looks like some money is coming to flip the favorite to Winthrop, which is kind of interesting. Oddsmakers telling you Winthrop is actually the better team in this matchup, enough so that they actually are a favorite at UNC Asheville. So that's kind of crazy to see. So the odds makers telling you who the better team is here, even though Winthrop is behind them in the standings just slightly. It's going to be a big game for both teams, but I might slightly lean to Winthrop in this one, although UNC Asheville almost lost to South Carolina upstate in their last game, which that's not a good performance from them. So I think maybe they were looking ahead to this game. So probably a refocus spot for Asheville coming into this. And Winthrop is coming off barely beating Charleston Southern. So both of these teams are coming off escapes against bad teams in this conference. So both teams should be focused here. And in that case, I kind of lean to which team the odds makers are telling you is the better team, and that is Winthrop. That is the way I would look there. RFK, yeah, electrocuted raccoon. Maybe he did electrocute some raccoons, man. Arizona State and Cincinnati is kind of a weird one, man. It's one of these weird Big 12 matchups where Arizona State's going to be going into an unfamiliar venue, man. They're not used to going into Cincinnati. I mean, being in the Big 12 now, I mean, it's just kind of weird. Kind of a weird spot, and they're traveling in from Arizona. Looks like kind of a weird spot, and they do have West Virginia and then Iowa State up next. West Virginia might actually draw a little bit more focus than Cincinnati would. Cincinnati not doing well since the start of conference play. So, I don't know, man. I mean, Arizona State is also coming off a couple of ugly home losses, so they might refocus as well. This is a tough game to gauge here, man. And Cincinnati coming off turning it around after they lost a few games. They beat Colorado on the road. So actually kind of a decent win for Cincinnati going into an unfamiliar venue in high elevation and beating Colorado. That's not a bad win, even though Colorado's not very good. I still give Cincinnati credit for that, and that should help them kind of break that losing momentum. And Cincinnati, I mean, I think maybe they're not as bad as they look as far as their conference record because, yeah, they lost to Kansas State. That's not a good loss. I was on Kansas State in that game. I thought it was kind of a bad spot for Cincinnati having to go out on the road with Arizona up next. And then they only lost to Arizona by 5. I mean, that's not that bad. Arizona's actually good. And then they lost to Baylor and Kansas. I mean, I'm not going to knock them for losing those. So Cincinnati, I don't think they're really that bad. So maybe the slight lean would be to Cincinnati. Cincinnati is actually up from 8 to 10 now. 67% of tickets, 89% of the cash. So actually, yeah, I mean, I would probably only look to lay the points here. I mean, this is kind of crazy that Cincinnati's only one game better than Arizona State. Both teams actually 1-4 in conference right now, but Cincinnati is a double-digit favorite in the game, even though they only have a record that's one game better. So the odds makers are telling you what you should think in that one, that Cincinnati is actually the significantly better team, and that line has gotten some money. Cincinnati has taken the money in that one. So that's pretty interesting. Next up is another play for me, and that is laying the points with Texas Tech against Arizona. And I know Arizona's good. I've been saying Arizona's flying under the radar because they had a gauntlet of an out-of-conference schedule. Arizona is good, but I think this might be a spot to finally go against them. Texas Tech up from 3 with juice to 3.5. 55% of tickets, 87% of the cash. So looks like we do have market agreement on this one. I was kind of trying to look for market agreement on my plays today. Being a little bit selective, but still playing 9 games, which is not very selective of me, so who knows. But I like Texas Tech in this one. I mean, the odds makers are telling you that these teams are almost about even, but the way Arizona has started conference play, they're hot right now. So I think the public is going to want to tend to come in maybe on Arizona because of how hot they are right now. They're one of 3 undefeated teams in the Big 12 now with just Houston and Iowa State. So Arizona, yeah, they definitely are good, but I think this is a spot to go against them and to take Texas Tech. Arizona, I mean, I think they just kind of legitimize themselves by beating Baylor. That's a big win, a double-digit win. They've rolled in conference play so far. Yeah, I know, big wins at Cincinnati and at West Virginia. West Virginia, they were not a top 25 team, man. West Virginia, Ken Palm has them somewhere down, like I think around like in the 40s. So West Virginia, not as good as people think they are. Cincinnati, like I said, I mean, they're probably actually better than they look, but they've really fallen down. So I think really this game against Baylor was really the game that kind of would be considered to be the legitimizing game for Arizona. I mean, Arizona's new to the Big 12, and Baylor is the team that you really want to beat in the Big 12, right? I mean, besides like Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, Baylor is one of those other teams. I mean, they're one of the staples of the conference. Baylor, I mean, they were ranked once that game happened. Pretty big win. And now Arizona has to go on the road. And I know they were good on the road against Cincinnati and West Virginia, but Texas Tech is a different animal, man. And Arizona, I mean, they've had some struggles on the road. I mean, they didn't do well against Wisconsin going on the road. Now going to Texas Tech, I mean, it's not an environment they're really familiar with at the very least, although I know Cincinnati and West Virginia are not either. But Texas Tech, again, they're a different animal. They're better than Cincinnati and West Virginia. I mean, Texas Tech definitely better than both of those teams, especially West Virginia, I would say. And Texas Tech, I think they're in a bounce-back spot here, man. I mean, they had that game against Iowa State where I played Texas Tech last Saturday, and Texas Tech blew the game on missed free throws. I don't know what Texas Tech was doing in that game, man. They should have won the game. They almost had it, man. They almost had the huge win against Iowa State. So after that, I think they were in a hangover spot going out to Kansas State. So I played Kansas State in that game. Texas Tech still actually won the game. So that shows me something. At Texas Tech, in a bad spot, they still were able to actually get the win. So I think that's actually going to help them have some confidence coming into this game. And they didn't play particularly well, so they know that they kind of got away with that game against Kansas State. And again, Kansas State covered for me when I played that game. Now Texas Tech is at home. Again, they're laying points, and I think the public is going to come in and want to take Arizona in this one, man. Even though Texas Tech has a slightly better record overall, Arizona has the better conference record, and Arizona's faced a little bit more of a difficult schedule, but the line is kind of telling you what you should think here about this game. Moving up a little bit on Texas Tech. Maybe you can get a little bit better than the 4. I don't know. And then the other thing about this is Arizona, they play a really fast tempo, man, and Texas Tech does not. So that's the other thing about this game. This is a huge tempo collision where Arizona wants to play real fast, and Texas Tech is going to ugly up the game and try to slow it way down and throw Arizona out of their element, man. And we saw Arizona, when they faced slow-paced teams like UCLA, really, UCLA was really, and Duke is actually another one. They have not done well against those slower-paced teams, man. So I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem that great to me, although Baylor is actually a slower-paced team in Arizona. But Arizona was able to speed that game up at home. I don't know that they're going to be able to do that here. Texas Tech, again, they play a real ugly style. So I think Texas Tech could be able to get this game into their half-court style and really throw Arizona out of their element. The only issue I might have with that is that, well, when you're talking about a slower, ugly game, then it is a little bit more difficult to cover a number, but this number isn't that much. I mean, this is basketball, so a lot of points get scored in basketball. So I will lay the points with Texas Tech in that one. And then as far as the pacing collision in Auburn against Georgia, I think both of those teams play like a mid-tempo game, so there's no real pacing issue there. Actually, Georgia plays a little bit slower. Never mind. So Auburn plays kind of a mid-tempo. Georgia a little bit slower. And Georgia actually can match Auburn with defensive efficiency. It's just Auburn is way better scoring than Georgia. But still, if Georgia can get that into a defensive game, both teams with good defenses, and Georgia can slow the pace a little bit, that also looks good for taking the points with Georgia. Next up is kind of this is another one where I'm going to fade Columbia again, man. I'm going to play Yale. Yale is the best team in the Ivy, man. I mean, the odds makers are telling you this, and I know we definitely missed the best number on this. It was 5.5 at some point, and I wish I got 7. We're going to have to lay 8 on this on the road. And again, the public is going to come in and I think look at this and think, what is going on with this number? 80% of the tickets, 82% of the cash on Yale. The money has definitely come in on the Yale side. And I know I'm not getting the best of it here, but I'm hoping that we just get the easy win for Yale here. I mean, this just looks like a totally misleading spread. I mean, you got an 8-6 Yale team against an 11-3 Columbia team, so it's like, what gives? The public's going to want to come in on Columbia, right, because they have the better record. And I already faded Columbia once in the first game to start Ivy play because Cornell was actually favored against them on the road. So I said we're going to play Cornell in that game, and Cornell won easily, and Cornell covered this number. They're not as good as Yale, and Cornell was only like a 1-point favorite in that one. So I think Yale hopefully should be able to win this game easily. I mean, Yale they've faced the more difficult schedule so far. I mean, they lost to Purdue, and they actually played them to within 8. Illinois, Chicago actually has not been that bad this year. Minnesota, I mean, that was on the road. They're a Big Ten team. So coming to within 3 of them, I mean, that's not a bad performance either. Yeah, they lost to Delaware. I mean, I don't know, Delaware's not that great. Rhode Island isn't terrible. And I think that was a good spot to play Rhode Island. Rhode Island stepped up their game. I think I might have played Rhode Island in that game, actually. Yale beat Vermont. They beat Akron. I mean, those are decent teams as well. And they only lost by 1 at UTEP, having to go to El Paso. They played them to within 1, and UTEP is actually one of the better teams in their conference this year. So this has not been a bad slate for Yale, I would say. So their record looks worse than it is because they played a more difficult schedule. And now they're going on the road, I know, to Columbia, but I just think Columbia is one of the most overrated teams, man, to start the season. This Columbia team, they played a really easy schedule so far. And Yale coming off beating Brown. Nice win to start conference play, and they actually covered this number against Brown. And Brown actually even might be better than Columbia. That was at home for Yale, but Columbia, yeah, they had that one win at Villanova. That's a really nice win, but other than that, they have not faced a difficult schedule at all. And then they got smashed by Rutgers. Then they started conference play, and they lost to Cornell by double digits. And honestly, I just think that's going to be kind of it's the type of loss that I think crashes you down to earth, man. I think Columbia's kind of coming to the realization they're not actually that good. Yeah, they're going to step it up against Yale, but Yale's going to try to step it up against them because Columbia has the best overall record right now in out of all the Ivy teams, tied with Princeton, I guess. Princeton with one more win and loss. But I don't think Yale's going to be unfocused playing against Columbia. And Columbia might be in a bad spot after playing that first Ivy game, a game you definitely step up for, and then you lose that game, and you start realizing maybe you're not as good as you thought you were. So I don't think it's a good spot there. And then you look at the luck differential here. It's crazy, man. Ken Bum has Yale as the 75th best team in the country, 55th best in offensive efficiency. That's pretty good. He's got them 194th in tempo, so I do think Columbia might play a bit of a slower game. Or no, actually, Columbia's mid-tempo as well. Never mind. So both teams mid-tempo. Columbia's got all the way down at 185th in the country. He's got Columbia at 25th in luck. So Columbia is the 25th most overperforming team in the entire country. He has Yale way up here as the much better team, 363rd in luck. He has Yale as it's out of like 365, 366 teams. He has Yale 363rd in luck. So he has them as the 3rd or 4th most underperforming team so far this season. So he's saying Yale is way better than they appear and that Columbia is way worse than they appear. And Yale's faced the 190th strength of schedule. Meanwhile, Columbia, he has this having faced one of the weakest schedules in the entire country. Where are they at? I mean, Columbia was a good story for a little while, but they're just not actually that good. He has Columbia's 363rd strength of schedule. So they have like the 3rd or 4th weakest strength of schedule in all of Division I basketball. And yeah, he only has Yale winning this game by, I think, around 6. So I know the line's getting a little bit out of hand, but I mean, the money's coming in on that side. I think it's a misleading spread here. Yale's the significantly better team. Excuse me. Give me Yale in that game. And that is the way that I will play that one. All right. Next up, Wright State in Northern Kentucky. This is a play for me. Northern Kentucky, -1.5. I will play them, even though I know Wright State. Odds makers are telling you they're the better team. I don't see market percentages on this yet, and I see no movement with Northern Kentucky just sitting at 1.5. But I think this is a spot to fade Wright State, man. In this Horizon matchup, Wright State, they just came off a barn burner game against IPFW in 2 overtimes. And how could you possibly look better in a loss than this, than scoring 113 points in a loss to IPFW, who's 14-6 overall, 7-2 in conference, and one of the top teams in the conference, and Wright State played that total barn burner of a game against them. I mean, that's crazy. And they're coming off of that. And then Wright State, next up, they have Milwaukee. And Milwaukee is also one of the top teams in the Horizon this year. So this game Looks like it's a sandwich spot, and I think they could be real tired after that game against IPFW. Game, again, it went into double overtime. Wright State played that team really tough, and now they have to go on the road to face Northern Kentucky. On the road so far, they haven't been great. I mean, they lost to Cleveland State, although Cleveland State is one of the best teams in the conference as well, but they did lose to them by double digits. They lost on the road at Robert Morris. Robert Morris isn't terrible, but still, Wright State, their track record on the road hasn't been that good. I know they face a somewhat difficult schedule, so I will give them that. So they're better than they would look as far as their record is concerned, but I just think this is a terrible spot for them. And Northern Kentucky, on the other hand, they're sitting at below 500, which actually both teams are. So I think as far as like what the public is going to think, I don't think they're really going to have much of an opinion one way or the other. But Northern Kentucky, I mean, they did actually beat IPFW at home. And then since then, they have gone on kind of a losing streak, but they lost to Youngstown, Oakland, and Cleveland State on the road. Youngstown on the road as well. So those losses aren't that bad. I mean, Youngstown and Cleveland State are a couple of the best teams in this conference. Oakland isn't really that bad either. So I don't think Northern Kentucky's conference results so far are really that bad. And actually, they lost at Robert Morris, too. Both these teams did. Northern Kentucky, I mean, they've had some difficult opponents in the mix there as well. So certainly the schedule not horrible on their side. But again, I just think it's a bad spot for Wright State coming off that crazy game and with Milwaukee up next. I think they may not be totally ready for this game. They may be a little bit out of steam here. And Wright State is a team that likes to push the tempo to some degree, up at 191st in tempo, so kind of a mid-tempo type of team. Yeah, I know Ken Palm does have them as a very unlucky team so far, but I think he has both these teams pretty unlucky. I don't know, he actually has Northern Kentucky mid-tier as far as luck, but he does have Northern Kentucky way slower tempo and the better defense. So you're going to get Northern Kentucky, if they can kind of grind this game, that's going to be better for Northern Kentucky, and it's going to throw Wright State kind of out of their element. Wright State still does want to kind of run the tempo a little bit higher. Northern Kentucky wants to really ugly up the game, slow it down, and play defense. So with Northern Kentucky, you are actually getting the better defense and the slower-paced team at the very least, even though you're not getting the better team. But I like all that, and the spot I think is bad for Wright State. So give me Northern Kentucky in that one. Not a UFC guy. I mean, I pay a little bit of attention to it, but not a whole lot. Yeah, I mean, you'll see me make like maybe a couple of UFC bets throughout the year, but I mean, it's too much to pay attention to. I just don't do it. All right. And it's a sport where, like, I mean, you're looking at a lot of, like, just really huge money lines, so there aren't really a lot of, like, competitive, like, line fights either, so I don't know what to do with that. All right. What else? North Alabama at North Florida. I mean, North Alabama, they're coming off kind of a close loss to Jacksonville. They have Lipscomb up next, which is a big look ahead. Lipscomb is the best team in this conference, even though I know Queens is ahead of them. I've been talking about how Queens is overrated, man, and I expect them to at some point drop off. Lipscomb is the best team in this conference. Jacksonville, also a good team in this conference. So kind of a sandwich spot for North Alabama here. And it's a fourth straight road game at North Florida. So don't love the spot for North Alabama there. So I would lean into North Florida. This is not one of my plays. North Florida coming off a couple of wins against bad teams, Bellarmine and Central Arkansas, but still that'll probably at least give them some momentum coming into this one. So I like North Florida. Now, when North Alabama's down from 3 to 2.5. And at least remember, North Florida is the team that actually beat South Carolina and Georgia Tech towards the beginning of the season. So kind of crazy to think about that because they're not really that good a team, but they still were able to be competitive against a couple of really good teams there. Toledo over in the MAC, coming off losing to Akron. I mean, that was a pretty big game on the road against Akron, losing that game. Akron, one of the best teams in the MAC, maybe the best. And they got Kent State up next, and Kent State is another one of the best teams in this conference as well. So Toledo is in a little bit of a sandwich spot as well here, in my opinion. Having to go on the road for the second straight time to face Ball State, who's not really that good. So that would have me leaning to Ball State a little bit. Ball State did just play Ohio, who is another pretty good team in the conference, but Ohio did beat them by double digits, so it wasn't like they took them to the wire or anything like that. But the market is indicating against Ball State, down from 2.5 to 1. But I would still lean that way. I do think it's a sandwich spot for Toledo, so not a play for me. And then Eastern Michigan, I will just point out, is just kind of odd that there's this weird, gambling scandal going on in Eastern Michigan. I don't know exactly what the deal is there, if they're, throwing games or something like that, but I don't know. There's some weird gambling situation with Eastern Michigan. They're playing at Bowling Green today. They just lost really bad at Central Michigan, but yeah, there's some weird... Yeah, EMU hoops flagged for suspicious betting. I don't know what the deal is there, but it's just kind of a weird situation where I don't know if that means that Eastern Michigan was betting against themselves, or no, they were talking about it was on a Wright State Eastern Michigan game in December. I don't know, and it's just coming out now. I don't know what the deal is, because Eastern Michigan looks like they've basically been playing normally, I would say, since then. I mean, they played competitively against Toledo, so I have no idea what we're talking about here. And they won that game against Wright State, so I don't know. It wasn't like they threw the game and bet against themselves, so I don't know what the deal is with that scandal there, but I just figured I would point it out because it is weird. Yes, they are. Queens, you want to see how overrated they are? Ken Bum has them down at 196th overall. He's got them 11th in luck index, 231st in strength of schedule. Lipscomb, 82nd in the country, 317th in luck, so one of the least lucky teams versus one of the most lucky. And better strength of schedules to some degree as well, 195th. Lipscomb, they will probably be, I don't know, is that game at Lipscomb? Lipscomb is going to be a big favorite in that game. I will point that out. Let me see. Where's, I'll take a look right now. Let me see. Oh, and Lipscomb did already lose to Queens as well at home. So, and Lipscomb was a huge favorite in this game, I assume. Yeah, Lipscomb was a 13.5-point favorite in this game. So they will probably be like an 8-point road favorite whenever that game is that you're talking about on February 8th, I guess is what you're talking about. Lipscomb will be a pretty big favorite in this game as well. Not an insurmountable favorite, but Lipscomb is definitely the better team. Let me see. And Lipscomb is going to want road revenge in that game as well. So, yeah, I disagree. I don't think it's going to happen. Charles. Oh, man. All right. What else is happening here? I skipped a bunch of games on the schedule here. I scrolled way down. No. All right. Man, this is trying to get this done here. I mean, Stanford is at North Carolina. North Carolina, they're starting to look like what we thought they were. They're still a decent team. They're up from 11 to 12. Huge favorite at home. 78% of tickets, 98% of the cash. Stanford is not used to having to go and play at Chapel Hill. So I would not want to fade North Carolina in that game. And then St. Louis is at Richmond. St. Louis just had a pretty big game against VCU and fell short after beating St. Bonaventure. So I don't know how they're going to react to that loss because they hadn't lost in a while. So that might be a game that maybe hangs them over into this game against Richmond. But Richmond is also coming off a big game, I think. Or no, they lost pretty badly, actually. It was a big game, but they lost badly to St. Bonaventure. So I don't know how to deal with that game either. St. Louis is up from 4.5 to 7, but they got 75% of tickets on them and 96% of the cash on Richmond. So it looks like there is buyback coming in with money coming in on the Richmond side. I am not going to get involved in that game. Yes, report back. You can tell me I was wrong or tell me that I was right as well if I was right. All right. Purdue and Oregon, one of the big games of the day. Pretty big game. And, by the way, actually, I will also point out, did I skip a bunch of games again? Oh, man, too many games I want to talk about, man. UTEP, they're coming off a big win over Liberty, man, and now they're playing a second straight road game at FIU. I don't like how it sets up there for UTEP. I would probably look to FIU in this one. Although I know I played FIU in their last game and they fell short. Even though it was a low-scoring game, they probably should have covered the number in that one, and they didn't quite get there against New Mexico State. That was a big game for them as well, and they played pretty tough, so I don't quite want to do it. But UTEP, I think, could be in a letdown spot, and the number has gone down from 4 to 2.5. But we do see 65% of tickets on Florida International and 85% of the cash on UTEP, but I don't know if I buy that. I mean, what public bettor is going to look at this and actually play Florida International here? I think we're seeing some weird market indicators here, man. This is a game that the public is probably not really eyeing and not really getting involved in, because to me it looks like, I mean, UTEP has the way better record, and they're only laying 2.5, so it looks really easy to play UTEP, and they just had a big win over Liberty, so I would lean to Florida International in that one. Purdue and Oregon, number 17 at number 13, one of the big games of the day. Purdue, I thought they were in a bad spot at Washington, man, because they had just absolutely annihilated Nebraska, and then they were going out to the Pacific Coast. Very difficult spot, very unfamiliar spot as well, having to go and play in Seattle. Not something they're used to doing, and I took Washington plus the points in that game, and Washington was winning that game. Like midway through the game, Washington was winning outright, and then Washington didn't even wind up covering the 7.5, which really frustrated me. I thought it should have been a win for me on the plus 7.5. And I thought Purdue was also in a look-ahead spot because this Oregon game looming on the horizon was a big game as well. Now, Purdue in that bad spot, that still shows me something, that Purdue went into Washington, unfamiliar territory, bad spot, and they still won the game. Now they get Oregon. I think Purdue is going to show up for this game against Oregon, man, even though I know this is another unfamiliar venue for Purdue to have to go to. Oregon coming off barely beating Penn State on the road. I took Penn State in that game because I thought it was a look-ahead spot at the very least for Oregon with this Purdue game coming up next. But now Oregon's actually the team that has to travel. So Purdue is actually already out on the Pacific Coast because they just played at Washington. Oregon's having to come back from Pennsylvania. So I actually think the travel spot is actually a little bit worse for Oregon. And based on the overall records, you would think that Purdue is actually the worst of the two teams, but I don't actually think so. Ken Baum actually has Purdue as the slightly better team. I think Purdue, I mean, look at their losses, right? I mean, they lost to Marquette. I mean, I'm not going to blame them for that. Tough road loss. They lost to Auburn, Texas A&M, and those are good teams. And then Penn State. I mean, Penn State, that was their worst loss. I was on Penn State in that game. It was a bad spot for Purdue, in my opinion. This, however, I don't think is a bad spot for Purdue. I actually like Purdue to continue their momentum here. Oregon's up from 2 to 2.5 with juice, 67% of tickets, 79% of the cash. So it does look like the money is coming in on the Oregon side, but I don't agree with it. I think both teams are going to show up for this. I think the travel situation's a little bit worse for Oregon, and I think the public is going to look at this and want to play Oregon, in my opinion, because they have the higher ranking and the better record. So I think the public is going to probably want to play Oregon over Purdue here, but Purdue, as I said, they're being underranked right now, man. And Ken Baum has Purdue 10th in the country, and he's got Oregon where? All the way down to 25th. So yes, Purdue is the better of these two teams, man. Yeah, Purdue does like to play slow, so that's the one kind of caveat here. Oregon does play faster, kind of a mid-tempo game, so maybe won't be the tempo that Purdue wants to play here. But I would still lean that way. Next up is my next play, which is USC plus the points, plus 1.5, or whatever we can get on this. What can we get on this? USC is actually flipped to the favorite now, so it's still basically like pick the winner. I mean, I like USC. Basically, I'm saying they're going to win the game, so either way you want to play this. USC is flipped from a 2.5-point dog, although with a ton of juice, so really they were like 2 or 1.5, and now they're a 1-point favorite. Not a huge difference, obviously, between a 1.5-point dog and a 1-point favorite. 53% of the tickets, 87% of the cash on USC. Although there's a little bit more of a difference in basketball, I guess, because teams can, of course, actually win by 1. It's more likely that happens than in football. But I think this is a bad spot for Wisconsin. I mean, yeah, they're up in the rankings. They're a good team for sure. They got a good-looking record. They just beat Ohio State. That was a nice win, and they were actually wrecking Ohio State in this game. And Ohio State came all the way back and either tied it or got to within 1 late in the game. So Wisconsin had to finish that game off. Now they have to go out to the Pacific Coast unfamiliar venue for Wisconsin here, man. Unfamiliar travel. They have not done that this year. I mean, their road games have been Marquette, Illinois, and Rutgers. So they have not had to go to the West Coast this year. So I think it's a bad spot for Wisconsin. They didn't do well on the road against Marquette and Illinois, although I know those are good teams. They did beat Rutgers on the road. USC is, I would say, better than Rutgers, but worse than Marquette and Illinois. So what can we glean from that? I don't really know. But Wisconsin, that was a big win over Ohio State. USC is a team they may not totally pay attention to, even though USC is kind of in the middle of the pack here right now. UCLA actually is behind them, but still, UCLA just has all that weight behind their name, man, and that's the next game for Wisconsin is UCLA. I mean, that's still UCLA, the basketball powerhouse, so it still could be a bit of a look ahead to UCLA. It's a bad travel spot for Wisconsin. USC, on the other hand, they are just staying at home, and they had a nice win over Iowa, which is that going to put them in a letdown spot? I don't really think so. When you have a ranked Wisconsin team coming into your place, you're going to show up for that game against Wisconsin. So I like all of that, and way better travel spot for USC because they're just staying out at home on the Pacific Coast. The money definitely looks like it's moving in the direction of USC. So I like all of that. Ken Baum obviously has Wisconsin as the better team. 23rd. He has Wisconsin actually at a faster tempo than you usually see out of them. 160th in tempo. He's got USC down at 65th, but they also play mid-tempo, so both of these teams similar tempo. USC is the worst team, but, I mean, USC isn't really a pushover. They're fairly battle-tested as well, so I think it's the type of spot, man. It's about the spot. It's a spot play. And as far as, like, the defense is concerned, USC is not that much worse defensively. Weird to see that Wisconsin is actually not as great defensively as they are offensively this year. So we'll see what happens in that game. But I like USC in that spot. All right. And then we got UNH, as I said, they're coming off that ridiculous upset win at UMBC, and now they're playing a second straight road game. That was a 13.5-point upset, and they got Bryant and UMass Lowell and Maine and UMBC again all up next. They have all bigger games coming up next than having to play the lowest team in the conference here, NJIT. So I actually like NJIT in this game, but do I want to put my money on a team as bad as NJIT? I don't, even though New Hampshire is actually probably basically just as bad, almost as bad as NJIT, not quite, but still, that was a huge upset win for New Hampshire. Like I said, I think it's a sandwich spot. It's a second straight road game. And NJIT, they might just be a little bit in an angry mood because of Maine taunting the children in the stands that I mentioned earlier, the field trip 8-year-olds or whatever who were in the stands there. Oh, God. This show is going to go 2 hours again, man. It's a fucking Saturday. What can you do? I talk too much about college basketball, but I enjoy it, so whatever. NJIT, yeah, I mean, I think they're going to want to bounce back from that game against Maine. I think they'll be a little bit in an angry mood after having the children in their audience taunted. And they were coming off a pretty decent performance at UMass Lowell in the game before that, which NJIT seems to play decently against UMass Lowell for whatever reason. Or UMass Lowell overlooks them. Although, yes, NJIT does have Vermont up next, which is a pretty big game, but still, I think it's a bounce-back spot for them, and it is a bad spot for New Hampshire. NJIT is up from 2 to 2.5 with juice, so some money has come in agreement with me on NJIT. So I agree with that side, obviously. I mean, obviously, I'm saying that is the side that I think is the right side there. Kent State and Miami, Ohio is the best MAC game of the day. Kent State coming off an ugly loss to Western Michigan, as I pointed out. That was a bad loss, man, to Western Michigan. 12.5-point underdog. Kent State loses the game. I think they may have been looking ahead to this one. So I think that might put them in a little bit of a better spot than Miami, Ohio. And we're looking at Miami, Ohio being 4-0 in conference so far, and Kent State sitting at 2-2. So I think Kent State may have a little bit of something to prove here. Miami, Ohio is just kind of rolling right now. They also beat Western Michigan, so the public might look at this and think, oh, Miami, Ohio is the better in-conference record, and they beat Western Michigan, who beat Kent State. So we should take the points with Miami, Ohio here, right? I don't think so. Kent State is still the better team. Odds makers are telling you that. They're up from 4-5 now. 88% of tickets, 96% of the cash. So I think they are getting the money, and I agree with Kent State in this one. I think both teams will show up, but Kent State, I think, is the slightly better team. I agree with what the market is telling you in this one. And did I miss Western Michigan? I hope I didn't. Let me see. Yeah, I think I skipped over Western Michigan, man. I apologize for that because Western Michigan, as I just pointed out, they're coming off a huge upset over Kent State on the road, like I just said. And now they're coming off of that and having to play Buffalo, who's been really bad in the MAC so far. Buffalo coming off a bunch of losses in a row, still looking for their first MAC win. So Western Michigan is in a little bit of a letdown spot there, but they are up from 7 to 8.5 with juice, with the money coming in on them. 86% of the cash on them and 73% of tickets over on Buffalo. Weird to see. I don't know why the public would be coming in on Buffalo. If they're even looking at that game, I don't know. But Western Michigan, I would only look to fade them after they just upset Kent State, man. So that's the way that I would look in that game. And then, yeah, I like Kent State against Miami. Merrimack over in the MAAC as they moved over from the Northeastern Conference. They're coming off a big game against Quinnipiac where they just barely lost, playing one of the best teams in the conference. Merrimack's one of the best teams in the conference as well. That was a pretty big game for them, and now they have to somehow come off of that. And I think they might be in a little bit of a hangover spot here, having to face Siena, who's not really that great. And Siena coming off a win over Sacred Heart, at least, which will probably give them a little bit of confidence coming into this game after they got housed by Quinnipiac. So the public might come in and, well, they know Merrimack's the better team. Of course they are. And Merrimack had a better game against Quinnipiac than Siena did. But I just don't think this is a very good spot for Merrimack. They're down from 7 to 6.5. Merrimack, also, as far as I know, they are pretty lackluster offensively. They definitely were last year. They are not a team that scores a lot typically, so hard for them to cover like a big number like that. So that's how I would look at that. Tennessee and Vandy is a play for me. That's right. Fight on, man. You like it? You like the long streams? Yeah, this is, oh, you're working today? That sucks, man, that you're working on a Saturday. But yeah, you like the background noise that I give you? That's what Top Lobster and David use it for as well. So I like that. I mean, that's fine. But hopefully I'm giving you some good information while you're doing it. I just have so many college basketball plays to name in. Vandy, I know this one is on the wrong side of the 7 as well. I didn't get to it fast enough, but I will take Vandy in this one plus the points. I know this is down from 7.5 to 5 now. So, again, I apologize. These lines move so fast, man. So, you got to get on them quickly. And this was 6.5 like an hour ago, basically. So, I don't know. 70% of tickets on Tennessee. Obviously, Tennessee is going to be public. But 53% of tickets on Vandy. So, actually still beating the closing number on some of these lines, even though I'm still not getting the best number. I'm still apparently beating the closing line on a bunch of these. And I think this is a bad spot for Tennessee. I mean, obviously, obviously the public is going to come in on Tennessee. In this one, Tennessee, they're coming off that win over Georgia where they absolutely blew out Georgia. So that was a big win for them. I mean, Georgia is ranked now. Pretty big win, and they beat Texas the game before that on the road. Got squeaked by them. Still decent win there, even though they barely escaped. That was coming off that horrible, horrible loss to Florida. So Tennessee, yeah, I mean, nice win over Georgia. Now they have to go on the road to face Vandy. And up next, they got Mississippi State, Auburn, and Kentucky all in a row starting 3 days from now. And then Florida after that. So this is a sandwich spot, man. This game is surrounded by games against all ranked teams. I think they may overlook Vandy here, man. Even though Vandy has shown signs of playing decently. They have a decent record this year. But Tennessee, I just think they have bigger fish to fry, bigger games surrounding this. So I think they may get caught in not the greatest spot here. Tennessee, when they've gone on the road, they haven't actually done that well. They did beat Illinois. I mean, that's a pretty good win on the road. That's a fine win. But other than that, they got wrecked by Florida, and then they barely got by Texas, who's, I said that, I mean, it's a decent win, but still, I mean, Tennessee didn't cover the number in that one, and Texas is not that great. So Tennessee, I mean, they've obviously been a much better team at home. I mean, that's the case in a lot of college basketball games. Obviously, the home team, there's a big home court advantage in college basketball. And Vanderbilt, obviously, this is like their game of the year, man. I mean, when Tennessee is one of the best teams in the country and Vandy is their little brother in the state of Tennessee, you know Vandy always wants to step it up when they face Tennessee for all those reasons. And Vandy, they're coming off a nice bounce-back win over South Carolina, but it was also a game where I played Vandy, and I thought Vandy should have covered that number, man. I mean, they were actually a huge favorite in that game, and they barely escaped against South Carolina. And Vandy, again, they were winning that game by margin for a while, and I thought they were going to finally get over the hump and put it away, and instead they almost lost the game. And Vandy shot horribly in the game, 19% from three. I mean, they did not have a good game. South Carolina, minus 13 in turnovers, and Vandy still barely got through that game, and that's just crazy. So Vandy barely escaped in that game. Now they got this huge game against Tennessee. I think they're going to be very focused in that game, whereas I think Tennessee's focus might be a little bit in question coming into this game. The money, obviously, like I said, looks like it's coming in on the Vandy side. Give me Vandy plus the points in that one. It's a huge game for them. The intense attention to detail. Oh, thank you. Although it is not translated to winning in college basketball this year, though. College basketball has been awful for me this year, man. Thank you, Matthew. College basketball has been so bad this year, man, for me. I just don't understand it because usually it's been a decent sport for me. Like the last couple of years, it was pretty good for me. This year has been terrible. All right, Texas and Florida. Interesting matchup, but I don't think there's really much of a situational aspect to this game. Well, actually there is, excuse me. Never mind. I keep saying that, and I'm like, wait a minute. I forgot what I was thinking. Florida's coming off that ugly loss to Missouri, man. I mean, Florida was a double-digit favorite in that game against Missouri, and they lost outright. And maybe it was a little bit of a hangover effect from housing Tennessee because I thought they were going to be in a letdown spot in the next game, so I faded them, and I took Arkansas in the next game, which I thought was a good play. Again, it's my college basketball just not hitting for me, even though I thought it was the right play. It was close to being a cover for Arkansas there. I thought Florida was in the letdown spot there, but they won the game, and maybe the letdown spot came in with this game against Missouri. But I think they're going to be in a bounce-back spot now after they lost badly in a game where they were favored by double digits. They don't really have anything on the horizon here. I expect focus out of Florida here against Texas. Texas, they're coming off a win over Oklahoma, where Oklahoma was a slight favorite in that one. I thought it was a bad spot for Texas because they had played Auburn and Tennessee really close, and they had to go out on the road to face Oklahoma, and they had Florida up next. So I thought Texas was in a bad spot, and they still beat Oklahoma. And it is still like a big rivalry, although it's bigger in football, the Red River rivalry, but it's still Texas and Oklahoma do have that rivalry that goes back to the Big 12 days, and now they're both in the SEC. So it's still a big game for them, and now a second straight road game against a Florida team that I think is going to be angry and hungry. And you're also looking at a Texas team that likes to play slow, and Florida does not. Florida likes to play very, very fast, so I would only lay the points with Florida on this one. They're a 10.5 point favorite, 86% tickets, 90% of the cash on them. Texas basketball, yeah, I mean, I think they're overrated. They're getting by on name recognition right now, Texas. Ken Bum's got them at 36th in the country, so, I mean, not terrible, but they're going to be they're probably going to be a bubble team as far as making the tournament, as far as it looks like right now. So Texas is going to need to get some wins. So even though they should be focused, I think you're going to get both teams being focused in this Florida game here. So there is that aspect. Oh, and by the way, Tennessee, they play really, really slow, 320th in tempo, and they're 63rd in luck. Vanderbilt does not play a slow tempo, and I know they got caught in a slow tempo game somehow against South Carolina, but they're 42nd in tempo, and yeah, they're up there in luck to 116th, but Tennessee is rated a little bit higher in the luck index, or fairly substantially higher in Ken Palm's luck index. But this is another contrast of styles to where Vandy is able to push the pace and run this game. That's not what Tennessee wants to do. Tennessee wants to slow the pace down. And then if Tennessee is somehow able to slow the pace down a little bit, it might make it a little bit more difficult for them to to actually cover, cover as a road favorite as well. I did bring up that comment already. Yeah, Texas. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like their name recognition makes them seem like they're better than they actually are. South Carolina upstate, I already mentioned, they're coming off that really close game against UNC Asheville. A huge performance from them as an 11.5-point underdog. They almost pulled off the upset. They came back at the end and almost were able to get there again. Now they're going on a second straight road game to Gardner-Webb, and they got High Point and Longwood up next after this, and those are two of the other best teams in the conference. So I think they may get caught in a bit of a hangover spot here, man. Playing so tough against UNC Asheville and having these big opponents up next. Second straight road game. I would only look to the Gardner-Webb side of this one. Gardner-Webb, though, they just played at Radford, who's up near the top of the conference as well, and they played a close game against Radford, and they do have UNC Asheville and Longwood and Winthrop all up next as well. So they have bigger games up next as well. So I don't quite want to do it, but I do think South Carolina upstate is in the somewhat worse spot, but Gardner-Webb's down from 8.5 to 7. So it does look like some money has actually come in on South Carolina upstate, USC upstate. I hate calling them USC upstate because they're actually South Carolina, not Southern California. So I don't know. All right. What else do I even want to talk about here? I mean, Loyola Chicago and Dayton. I mean, the odds makers are telling you what to think in this game. Dayton just hasn't gone well for them so far in conference play. They're going to be hungry for a win, I think, at this point in conference play, even though, yeah, they played a tough game against George Mason, but they're not going to overlook Loyola Chicago, I don't think. Loyola Chicago's got a good overall record, but I don't think they're really actually that good this year. They're coming off a nice win over Rhode Island. And you look what the odds makers are telling you, that even though these teams have very similar records, and Dayton has the worst in-conference record, Dayton is laying 9.5 points in this game, so it looks like a suspicious line there where the public is going to probably kind of think that there's value on Loyola, but I would lean to the Dayton side there. They are down from 11 to 10.5, though, and they're very public somehow, which doesn't make sense to me because, like I said, I would think that the public perception would be, oh, these teams are so similar in records, take the points. But again, you have to be careful with the basketball percentages as well, because a lot of these games in the smaller conferences, the public is just not paying attention to them at all. So a lot of times the ticket percentage is not even public money. 94% of the tickets and 93% of the cash on Dayton. So hard to gauge that one. Let me see. Bradley is at Murray State. That's an interesting one in the Missouri Valley. Bradley, I mean, they're coming off absolutely smoking Indiana State, scoring 118 points against Indiana State. I mean, that is insane. How do you score 118 points in college basketball? I do not know. And now they're going out on the road, and they do have Belmont up next, and Belmont is another one of the better teams in this conference. So I think the spot is not that good for Bradley. And even before that game, they played Illinois Chicago, who's been playing pretty well, and they had a close game against Drake, who's probably the best team in the conference, the game before that. So I think this is not a very good spot for Bradley here against Murray State. Murray State, they're coming off losing to Illinois Chicago, which I know Illinois Chicago's been playing pretty well, but still, I mean, you got Bradley coming into your house. I think you're going to show up for that game against Bradley. Let's see. Murray State's up from a pick 'em to a 1.5 point favorite. So the market does appear to be strongly indicating on Murray State. 86% of the cash, 80% of the tickets on Bradley. So Murray State looks like they are the right side in that game. So that is a lean. That is the way that I would look there. Let's see. Central Connecticut and Fairleigh Dickinson. I mean, this is kind of this is a game where, I mean, Central Connecticut, again, they're coming off that ugly loss. 2 ugly losses in a row, actually. I think they were a 7.5 point favorite against Long Island, and they were a double-digit favorite, 10.5 against Wagner, and they lost both those games. So they're coming off 2 ugly upset losses and now going to face Fairleigh Dickinson. I think they're in a bounce-back spot here. Fairleigh Dickinson, I don't really think they're that good or as good. They're coming off a loss to St. Francis, PA. I mean, not a lot you can take away from that, but I think you're going to get Central Connecticut in a focus spot here, and they are good enough that they're a road favorite here, although they're a bit down from 5 with heavy juice down to 5 with reduced juice. So it does look like money is coming in against Central Connecticut, but I don't really agree with it, man. When you're the better team and you're coming off 2 horrific losses as a big favorite, I think that's the way you got to look in that game. And UMass Lowell is at Bryant. This is a big game in the American East here. On the surface, it looks like, oh, UMass Lowell is the better team. Then you see Bryant is laying 4.5 in this game, and it looks pretty tempting from the public's eye, I would think, to take the points with UMass Lowell. Oh, you're getting the better team and getting points here, but I think that's the wrong way to look here. Bryant up from 2.5 to 4.5. So the money looks like it has come in a little bit on Bryant. This is going to be a game where both teams are going to show up for this game. I mean, I agree with the Bryant side in this one. I thought they would get caught in that game against Albany. They did not. But again, both teams coming off games that aren't really that important. UMass Lowell beat NJIT or whatever. So both teams are going to show up focused in this one. But odds makers, I think, are telling you that Bryant is actually maybe even the slightly better team out of the two. They've just faced like a more difficult schedule so far. And then Troy and South Alabama is going to be a pretty good one in the Sun Belt Conference between 2 of the best teams in the Sun Belt. South Alabama is sitting at 3.5, but 56% of the tickets, 59% of the cash coming in on Troy. I don't even know if I would have a lean in this one, man. This one is tough to gauge. I mean, Troy's coming off beating Louisiana Monroe, bouncing back from a tough loss to Arkansas State, who may be the best team in this conference. South Alabama beat Southern Miss, which I thought was also a tough spot for them, coming off Arkansas State and Old Dominion, having this game against Troy up next. So both teams are going to be focused in this game, and it comes down to which team do you think is actually the better team here. And odds figures are telling you it's about even, so it's very hard to gauge that one. Man, I'm talking about way too many games here, man. Let's see. South Carolina's at Oklahoma. I mean, South Carolina, they're definitely the worst of these two teams. They're coming off playing another tough game. They took Auburn to the wire, and then they played Vandy really tough on the road in the next game. They got Florida up next. So I think this might be a spot where they actually are in a difficult spot, and they actually fall way short in this one. So I would look to the Oklahoma side. Yeah, Oklahoma's coming off that loss to Texas. That was a game Oklahoma should have won, and they were getting blown out of that game. And I mean, as far as like how I handicapped that game, I thought Oklahoma should have won that game in that spot. So I do think Oklahoma kind of in an embarrassed spot. Oklahoma's up from 6.5 to 7.5. 88% of tickets, 98% of the cash. So I would look to the Oklahoma side in that one if I was going to play that game. Man, I'm still only in the 4 p.m. games, man. Oh, God help me. And then Quinnipiac coming off that big win over Merrimack, but they're facing another one of the best teams in this conference in Mount St. Mary's on the road. So I don't think they're going to overlook Mount St. Mary's here. So I don't really know if the hangover spot's going to apply here, but Mount St. Mary's coming off a pretty ugly loss to Rider. So they may have been looking ahead. So maybe they'll be in the bounce back spot here. So maybe that's still the way to look in this one. But Quinnipiac is up from Pick'em to 3.5. But they got 67% of tickets on 69% of the cash coming in on Mount St. Mary's. So it looks like the cash percentage at least is coming in on Mount St. Mary's. And I agree with that side slightly. I think situationally it sets up a little bit better for them in the bounce back spot. Iowa State at West Virginia. Fairly big Big 12 matchup here. I mean, Iowa State, I would look to go against them in this game. And I mean, they got away with that win at Texas Tech. That was a big win at Texas Tech. A game where Texas Tech blew it on missed free throws at the end. Like I said, I'm pissed because I had Texas Tech in that one. Then Iowa State had the huge game, the game that everybody was hailing as one of the big matchups. I think that was last Saturday, maybe. So they've been off. Or no, that was in the middle of the week, I guess. Again, last Saturday was the Texas Tech game. Iowa State against Kansas. Everybody was hailing that as a huge Big 12 matchup between 2 of the top teams in the Big 12. And Iowa State handled Kansas, man. A nice win. So I think Iowa State might be feeling a little bit too high on themselves here, going out on the road now to Morgantown. Not really the easiest spot, even though they've been fine on the road so far, but like they've won every game on the road so far, but they probably should have lost to Texas Tech. They pushed the number against Colorado. Colorado's really not a very good team. And they beat Iowa on the road. I mean, a decent win because Iowa was going to be gunning for them as the basically the little brother in the state of Iowa now. So Iowa State, though, yeah, I mean, they're coming off that huge win over Kansas and now having to go out on the road to face West Virginia. So I would start leaning to the West Virginia side in this one. West Virginia, yeah, they played Houston, which was a tough game, and they got wrecked by Houston. But, I mean, Houston is a very good team. West Virginia, it's not like they're going to be unfocused with Iowa State coming into their place. So I like the West Virginia side in this one a little bit. But Iowa State's up from 6 to 6.5. 65% of tickets and 75% of the cash on Iowa State. The one maybe caveat here is that I think West Virginia's been a little bit overrated all season. They were in the rankings for a while. Now they're finally not in the rankings anymore. But West Virginia, not really a top 25 team. So maybe there won't be that much line value in taking West Virginia. But still, Iowa State, I mean, you got to think that the line is a little bit jacked up on the Iowa State side of anything because they're number 2 in the country now. So that would be the way that I would look, would be to take the points with West Virginia in that one. Illinois State coming off playing really close against Drake, man. I mean, that's a big performance against Drake as 10.5-point underdogs, and they played them to within 4 points. So Illinois State coming off of that, I don't think it puts them in a very good spot. But Missouri State still doesn't even have a win in the MVC this year. They've been playing awful. But then again, you might say, well, that means they're going to bounce back finally, and they're going to finally be able to get a win, right? Maybe. I mean, they'll probably have to show up because they've just been getting totally embarrassed. So I might look to take the points with Missouri State here, but Illinois State's up from 9.5 to 10. 75% of tickets and only 58% of the cash on them. So it does look like they are public with less of the cash on them. So I would lean to taking the points with Missouri State, but man, that is, I don't know. I do think it is like a worse spot for Illinois State, though, a hangover spot coming up that big game against Drake. Chattanooga and Furman is going to be the best game in the SoCon today. And Furman coming off a big win over ETSU, and Chattanooga is also going to be a big game, though. So, I mean, I don't think they can afford to really overlook Chattanooga here. I mean, East Tennessee was also a big win. Chattanooga coming off beating Wofford. I mean, that was also a decent win. Both teams, I think, are going to be focused in this game and show up. So it's pretty difficult to gauge this game. Furman down from 5 to 4.5. Odds makers are telling you they are the better team, but not by that much. 90% of tickets, 99% of the cash on Furman. So Furman is quite public in this game. The line looks like it's ticked down on them a little bit. Excuse me. So maybe a spot where it would make sense to try to take the points with Chattanooga. I don't know, man. And then in the CUSA, we got Jacksonville State. That was one of my plays the other day. They were able to get the job done and win against Louisiana Tech. Now they got Sam Houston, who has not been playing well in conference this year, coming off a big win over Louisiana Tech, and then UTEP up next. I know Louisiana Tech doesn't have a great conference record either, but they're still pretty good, and they have a good record. So that was a good win for Jacksonville State. And they got UTEP and New Mexico State up next. So I think they may overlook Sam Houston in this one. Sam Houston coming off a loss at Kennesaw, but it is the second straight road game now for them. And Kennesaw not really that bad either. So that was a fairly competitive performance out of Sam Houston at the very least. But I do think Jacksonville State is still in the worst spot here, and they are actually down from 3 to 1.5. So some money has come in agreement with me on that one and taken Sam Houston, which I do tend to agree with. I just think it's hilarious, by the way, that Bethune-Cookman in the SWAC, like terrible, terrible team, is a 24-point favorite in this game because Mississippi Valley State is so bad. They may be the absolute worst team in Division I. It is hilarious that Bethune-Cookman, they're actually down from 20. They were actually at 24 and a half, I saw for a little bit, down to 23 now, but still, that is absolutely insane to see Bethune-Cookman laying points like that against anybody. That's just how bad. And they're 5-11 overall. That's just how bad Mississippi Valley State is. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Ole Miss at Mississippi State. This is one of my plays. Yeah, let's get back to it. We're almost getting to the end of it here. Mississippi State -6 is going to be the play here. Number 21, Ole Miss. Number 15, Mississippi State. The rankings makers are telling you Mississippi State's the better team. I agree. Mississippi State is the better team. Although a couple years ago or last year, I would have said, well, Mississippi State, you're getting the better defense here. because Ole Miss was playing some pretty bad defense last year. But Chris Beard, as I mentioned, has really turned that team around, and Ole Miss actually is starting to play really good defense. And it's actually, I think Mississippi State actually might be the better offense now in this game. But nonetheless, Mississippi State's up from 4 to 5.5 now. So you might be able to get 5.5 rather than 6 on this one. We can look to see what the best number is. 54% of the cash is on Mississippi State. It looks like some legitimate money has come in on their side. 51% of tickets taking the points with Ole Miss. Here, thinking this is going to be a competitive game. I mean, it is a big matchup for both teams because it is a big, Mississippi matchup here. But Ole Miss actually has the better record. They're 4-0 in conference. They've only lost 2 games all season. So that's why I think the public might be thinking it makes sense to take the points here, even though the rankings makers and the odds makers are all telling you Mississippi State is actually the better team. But Ole Miss, I mean, their record is prettier looking. Ole Miss coming off a huge win over Alabama, so that's really the reason why I'm going to play Mississippi State here. Second straight road game. I mean, winning against Alabama, I mean, that is like what we call the legitimizer type of game. I've mentioned that a couple of times on this stream already. That's when you win that, like, you have that first, like, huge win of the season that, like, establishes you as, like, a legitimate team. And beating Alabama on the road, no less, yeah, that is certainly, that's that game for Ole Miss, man. I mean, that's a huge win against Alabama there. And Alabama, I don't know what the spot, Alabama was in a bad spot actually in that game. Did I play Ole Miss in that one? I don't know if I did, but Alabama was coming off beating Texas A&M on the road, a huge ranked matchup win, and they had Kentucky coming up next today, so they got caught in a sandwich. So Ole Miss was able to take advantage of that bad spot that Alabama was in, and I think Ole Miss actually plays pretty slow as well. So they were able to kind of slow the game down a bit and kind of ugly it up. Actually, they play a little bit on the slower side, certainly slower than Alabama wants to. But in this game, even though Ken Baum has Mississippi State as a slightly worse team, he actually has them as the better offense, not the better defense, which is weird to see. He's got both teams kind of in the mid-tempo range, so that doesn't really matter that much. And then he does have them, like, he basically has them similar in all these different metrics and luck index. He does have Mississippi State having faced the more difficult schedule, though, but not by a whole lot, but a little bit. So very actually similar in rankings here, as like across the board. He does have this game in only, I think, about 4 because he has Ole Miss as the better team, but I'm not sure that I agree with that. I like Mississippi State, especially in this spot, because Ole Miss, they're coming off that win over Alabama, and they got Texas A&M up next. So even though, yeah, this is a big game against your in-state rival, but when you're coming off Alabama and you're facing a second straight road game, I think that's a pretty difficult spot to be in. And Mississippi State's coming off that loss to Auburn. And again, I played Auburn in that game because it was the injured player theory spot for Auburn with Broome with his first game out. Auburn was coming off a close call against South Carolina, and Mississippi State was coming off a close call on the other side of it where they almost were able to beat Kentucky. So I thought it was a really bad spot for Mississippi State. Now, they got wrecked in that game by Auburn. So now I think it is a bounce back spot. It is a focus spot for Mississippi State in this one. So give me them in that game minus the points. All right. And then what do we got? I don't know if, again, like, do I really want to talk about all these games? Drake, I mean, they're coming off a near, like, they almost lost to Illinois State as a big favorite, so they should be in a bounce back spot here. But then on the other hand, Indiana State just lost 118 to 65, so that's totally embarrassing. So I think both these teams have reason to show up here, but then it might come down to Drake being the better team. They're up from 5 to 7.5 as a road favorite, but 86% of tickets and only 72% of the cash on them. So the money has moved up on them, but they do have less of the cash than the tickets on them. Cal, by the way, is at NC State. I don't even know what to think about this game. NC State laying points. I mean, Cal having to play on the East Coast. It is an unfamiliar venue for them. NC State lost at Virginia Tech in their last game. They were coming off a tough, close game against UNC, which, of course, is a huge game for NC State. So they may have been in a bit of a hangover spot there against Virginia Tech. So maybe they will be in a little bit of a bounce back mode here. And Cal just got smoked by UNC, but they're facing a second straight road game in the state of North Carolina, so I don't know. Debatably, though, maybe that would mean it would also be a bounce-back spot for Cal. I don't know, man. NC State is down from 7 to 6, 83% of tickets, 91% of the cash on them. So tough to gauge. It looks like they do have the cash disparity on them, but the line has gone down on them. I lean to laying the points with Nevada. We're getting close to the end, man. We're in the evening slate now. This is crazy. San Jose State, I mean, they're coming off a game where I played San Jose State in this game against New Mexico, and they won the game outright as 9.5-point underdogs. I think I took them at plus 10 in this game. Huge upset win for San Jose State. And now they have to go on the road to face Nevada. And Nevada's coming off, I think, a pretty bad game. Let me see. They came off of barely beating Air Force as 19.5-point favorites. They only won the game by 6, and they were losing the game for almost half of it. Pretty bad performance. So Nevada's in a bounce-back spot, in my opinion, and San Jose State's in a letdown spot. The problem is Nevada does have a huge game against Utah State up next. So I don't know. I do still lean to Nevada. They're sitting at 13, 80% of the tickets and 86% of the cash. So it looks like some more of the cash is coming in on Nevada. I mean, based on these teams' records, it looks like it's a bit of a high number to be laying on Nevada, but I think the spot does set up for maybe a spot where you lay the points with Nevada in that one. And New Mexico, they were in a sandwich spot, which is why they lost to San Jose State. That's why I played San Jose State. San Jose State caught them. I mean, New Mexico had just beaten San Diego State, huge win, and they had Boise up next. And they did beat Boise last night, so I was right about that game as well. So big game there for those are big games for New Mexico there, and that was a big win for San Jose State there nonetheless, although it was in a bad spot, like I said. Arkansas at Missouri, play for me. Arkansas plus the points. Missouri, you know what I'm about to say here, man. Missouri's in a letdown spot. They just beat Florida as double-digit dogs on the road. Huge win. Florida may have been in a little bit of the letdown spot there, man, because Florida, was coming off that huge win, blowout win over Tennessee, and then didn't really suffer the letdown against Arkansas. They finally got caught against Missouri. That was a huge win for Missouri, and I don't think Missouri is really that good. Now they get Arkansas, who's not a team that I don't think they're really going to be focused on right now, even though it is Calipari. Arkansas hasn't even won in the SEC yet, and they got Texas, and then Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Texas A&M all up next. A bunch of much bigger games up next, in my opinion. So I think it's a bad spot, maybe even a sandwich spot, but certainly a letdown spot for Missouri here. And the public's also going to look at this and think, well, wait a minute. Arkansas lost to Florida, and Missouri beat Florida. So, of course, Missouri's going to win against Arkansas, right? This is easy. Again, it doesn't work that way. And Arkansas, they're looking for their first win in conference. They've faced some difficult games in conference, man. I mean, losing to Tennessee and Florida, I'm not going to blame them for that. And they played close against Ole Miss, too. And now they're coming off their worst loss so far in conference play at LSU. Not a great performance there. So even though this is a second straight road game, I think it's a really bad spot for Missouri. And I think Arkansas has got to be pretty hungry to try to get a win finally. This game's actually up to 6 now. Missouri up from 5 to 6, but 72% of tickets and 94% of the cash on Arkansas. I like Arkansas. It does look like the cash disparity is on them, even though the line has gone up on them a little bit. Give me Arkansas plus the points in that one. All right, what else we got? Samford and East Tennessee is going to be a big game in the SoCon here. Samford, they're coming off a win over Mercer on the road, barely beating Mercer. So I think they kind of escaped against Mercer, really. And I said that was a sandwich spot where I thought it was a bad spot for Samford coming off the win over UNC Greensboro with East Tennessee and Chattanooga up next. It wasn't the greatest spot for them having to face Mercer. So barely escaping against Mercer, I think, is going to put them in a more focused spot here. East Tennessee is having to play Furman and Samford back-to-back, both on the road, and they just played really tough against Furman. So it is kind of a tough spot for them, even though they should be focused here. But when you're facing both really good teams back-to-back in back-to-back games like this, it's not the easiest situation, and Samford should be focused here. Up from 5.5 to 6, 75% of tickets, 94% of the cash. So it looks like the market is in agreement with me on that one as well. On the Samford side, I'm skipping a bunch of these games late. Skip it. Liberty, I mean, they're coming off that loss to UTEP, which was a tough game. 2 tough games in a row, actually, against Louisiana Tech and UTEP. So are they going to bounce back, or are they going to have not much left in the tank against New Mexico State? That is the question. And New Mexico State coming off not the greatest performance after clobbering UTEP. I thought they were in a really bad spot. And Louisiana Tech the game before that, I thought they were in a bad spot. Second straight road game against FIU. Now it's a third straight road game. So I don't know what to think about that. So in a way, I almost want to say that Liberty's in a bounce back spot here, and it's a tough spot for New Mexico State. And I do think New Mexico State's a little bit overvalued right now because they look better than they are based on their records. So I kind of would want to lead to Liberty, but Liberty's down from 7.5 to 6.5. 80% of tickets, 92% of the cash on Liberty. I mean, the odds makers are telling you they are the better team despite what the records would indicate. So again, I don't know what to really tell you about that. UNLV, I would think they'd be kind of in a letdown spot because they just had a huge win over Utah State. I mean, that's a legitimizing type of win, but the problem is San Diego State is also a huge opponent. So I don't think they're really going to have a letdown spot when they have a big opponent right after it. So even though they may run out of steam, though, they may run out of gas. So I still certainly would not play UNLV here. And San Diego State's just coming off a nice bounce back win over Colorado State. Not a huge win there. So I do still lean to fading UNLV here. San Diego State's down from 11.5 to 10.5, but they have 92% of tickets on them or 92% of the cash, with 50% of tickets evenly split. So I do still agree with fading UNLV coming off that huge win, but again, it is still a spot where they may still at least get up for this game. So tough to gauge. And then you got Northern Arizona, or actually, who did I want to look at here? Let me see, because Portland State, one of these teams is coming off. Oh, yeah, Portland State is coming off playing really close against Northern Colorado. Northern Colorado is the best team in the Big Sky this year. That was a huge performance for Portland State, coming close to them, almost winning the game against, they were losing most of the game, and they came all the way back and made it real close and gave Northern Colorado a really close game in the end of it. And now Portland State, after that, has to face a second straight road game at Northern Arizona. Northern Arizona has been struggling a bit in conference, but they did have a nice bounce-back win over a pretty bad Sacramento State team. So that, I think, might just give them a little bit of confidence coming into this game. Northern Arizona has played at least tough against most of the conference opponents. Like playing Montana tough on the road is a pretty good sign there. So I would lean to Northern Arizona on this one. They're up from 2.5 to 4.5. 75% of tickets, 100% of the cash on them, which obviously that's not right. But it still looks like the money is indeed coming in on their side there. All right. And again, I don't want to hit every single one of these games, but, I'm trying to point out things that are at least interesting. Let's see here. Texas A&M, what's the spot that they're in? Yeah, I mean, they just had a couple of tough games against Alabama and Kentucky. But the Kentucky loss wasn't that close. It was by double digits. So I don't know if that really puts them in that bad a spot here, or if they're going to bounce back now that they're back at home, where they lost their last home game. And they do have a ranked Ole Miss opponent up next, but I don't know. And LSU's coming off a decent win as well over Arkansas. So I don't know, man. The market read, Texas A&M is up from 10.5 to 11.5, so they are certainly the better team. 90% of tickets, 96% of the cash on Texas A&M, so I don't know. And then you got Gonzaga and Santa Clara. They're both coming off ugly losses, so they're both in bounce-back spots, I would say. So I would probably just lean to Gonzaga because they are the better team there. They're up from 14 to 15.5. Gonzaga just lost on the road to Oregon State, and Santa as a pretty decent favorite. And Santa Clara lost in a game that I played on Loyola Marymount because I thought it was a sandwich spot for Santa Clara. Nice, easy win for me, really, on Loyola Marymount. Outright win. So Santa Clara losing as the favorite in that one. So both teams in bounce-back spots in that one. It doesn't mean Loyola Marymount is kind of in a bad spot because they just upset Santa Clara, but San Diego just played really close as a huge underdog against Washington State. So I don't want to touch this game either. Both teams in bad spots in that game. Loyola Marymount down from 12 to 11.5, but nothing to really mention there. And then my last college basketball play, I have tons of plays. Down at the end of the slate, San Francisco -3 against Oregon State. Like I said, Oregon State, I think they're in a letdown spot, even though, yes, San Francisco is a good team, but Oregon State just beat Gonzaga, man. San Francisco's up from 2-3 with juice now. 80% of the tickets, 97% of the cash. So it does look like the actual money is coming in on San Francisco. They're a good team. So, I mean, Oregon State, you would think should still be focused in this game. But when you just beat Gonzaga, I mean, and as a pretty substantial underdog at home, I mean, that's like your biggest win of the season, basically. And that was your arrival as a new member of the WCC before the Pac-12 reforms. So that was a huge win for Oregon State. And now they have to go out on the road to San Francisco, and that's a venue they're not familiar with because they're new to this conference. So it's also an unfamiliar venue. And if you look at what Oregon State has done on the road in conference so far, they lost really bad at Loyola Marymount, and they lost at Santa Clara as well. And they blew out Pacific, but Pacific is not good. So not really a good track record going on the road. And then even in their other road games, they lost at North Texas as well in their other road games. So Oregon State has not been very good on the road. San Francisco, on the other hand, they just beat Pepperdine. Excuse me, and a nice bounce back win there after that bad loss to Santa Clara, where Santa Clara got revenge on them in a big way. San Francisco bounced back. I think they will be focused with Oregon State, a big name, a team that used to be in the Pac-12 coming into their place. And they do have St. Mary's up next, which would, I would say, be cause for look ahead otherwise, but I don't think they're going to overlook Oregon State here. So give me San Francisco in that one. Yeah, every single one of the games. Not quite, but man, it's crazy. Let's move over to the hockey slate here, man. We got my Boston Bruins at Ottawa. I'm not going to talk about every one of these games either, but the Bruins, they're not in a good spot here, man. I mean, they just beat Florida in overtime, and then they came home and crushed Tampa Bay. And they've had extra time off, and that might disrupt their winning momentum as well. Now they have to go out to Ottawa. I don't think it's a very good spot for the Bruins. Problem is, Ottawa's coming off a close, tough loss against Washington that went into overtime 2 days ago, and they do have New Jersey up next. So I don't know, man. It's a tough read in this one, and I don't think Allmark is back yet either. He's been hurt for a while, so I don't know when he's coming back. Ottawa, I think they did also beat Boston the last time they played them, but that was a while back now. Yeah, they beat them in overtime in Boston. So that might be a little bit of revenge motivation for Boston here, if anything. But Boston, yeah, I mean, I think they are in a bad spot. So I would lean to Ottawa. But they're up from -128 to -131. 57% of tickets and only 55% of the cash. So it does look like less of the cash on them. So obviously I do not want to do it. Let's see what else. Dallas and Colorado is a very interesting one, where I think Colorado's in a bad spot because Colorado had Edmonton completely dead to rights, man. I mean, they were winning this game 3-0 in the first period, and then they lost the game 4-3. I mean, that's crazy. You have a good team like Edmonton at home, and you're running them out of the building, and then you blow the lead and lose the game. That's crazy. So I think that's going to put Colorado in a pretty bad spot here, but Dallas is a team they should still be focused on. So it's a tough read here, man. So if it was a team that they'd be less focused on, I might be more tempted to play it. But Dallas is also, I think, in a bounce back spot because they had that return home spot that was a really bad spot for them. I played Montreal in that one a couple days ago, got the nice win on Montreal there. And now Dallas is going out on the road, so they can forget about that bad loss at home. Ugly loss. It is a bounce back spot for them to go out on the road and just focus and play against Colorado. So I agree with the Dallas side here, but some weird market signals here. Colorado down from -124 to -119, 63% of the cash on them, 67% of tickets on Dallas. So kind of a tough read there. Tough to gauge. I'm skipping some of the games with the bigger favorites here, man. So forgive me for that. Montreal, like I said, they're coming off that big win over Dallas and returning home. Interesting spot, but I don't think they're going to overlook Toronto either, though. I mean, Toronto's a good team, and of course, Toronto, Montreal, I think there is kind of that like original six rivalry thing going on there. So both teams might show up here, but Toronto also coming off a big win in overtime over New Jersey. So both teams coming off big wins in that one, so tough to gauge in that one. Toronto's down from minus 155 to minus 135. Looks like some money has come in on Montreal, but 79% of tickets and 87% of the cash on Toronto. So I don't know, man. Tough to gauge there. Detroit and Tampa, and do I really want to? I'll talk about this one. Detroit, they just beat Florida, man, and now they're facing a second straight road game at Tampa, so I just don't think it's a very good spot for Detroit here. Tampa just got taken into a shootout by Anaheim, and that was in a return home spot, so it was kind of a bad spot for them, and they didn't play very well, so I do think it is a bounce-back spot, but they do have Toronto up next, so I don't know if they're going to overlook Detroit at all here. Detroit, again, I think they're in the bigger letdown spot here, so I would look to lay the price if I was going to play this one. I would lay it with Tampa. Tampa's up from minus 198 to minus 205, but 70% of tickets and 85% of the cash over on the other side on Detroit, so I don't know how to gauge that either, man. Columbus in New York is a play for me. Columbus plus 158. I'm going to take a shot on Columbus on the money line here. I think it's a bad spot for the Rangers. They're returning home from a road trip that they've been gone for about a week. So, I mean, when you leave home and you've been gone for a week, you come home, you got stuff to do around the house, especially when they have to leave and play in Montreal tomorrow. So that's going to, I think, become more of a distraction because you know you have to get whatever you have to do at home out of the way before you go on that road trip to Montreal. So even though Columbus has been hot, I think they may overlook Columbus in the spot, man. They had a successful road trip, beating Vegas, taking Colorado into overtime, and then beating Utah. Now they're coming down out of elevation, and Montreal has also been hot. And I don't know if Montreal may actually draw their focus a little bit more because, again, it is that original six rivalry thing going on. And meanwhile, Columbus, I think, is actually in a good spot, leaving home to go out on the road. And when you start a road trip, like I always say, you want to win that first game of the road trip and get it off on the right foot. So you tend to be focused. So that momentum that Columbus has right now with all these wins in a row, they weren't against good teams, but still, I think they have momentum from all these wins at home that they can carry out on the road with them into this game. So I like Columbus in this one, even though, yeah, it's an underdog with the better record here. But the Rangers are up from minus 175 to minus 195. So I think you can get a better price on this. You may start wanting to look to play Columbus on the puck line here. Rangers 74% tickets, 98% of the cash. So maybe I should reconsider this one. Actually, I don't know, but I'll give it out as a play anyway because I do think it is a bad spot for the Rangers, and it is a focus spot, a positive spot for Columbus. Pittsburgh won for me yesterday, so they're in a back-to-back. So that's tough, man, when they're playing 2 straight days, having to go to Washington. So it is a tough spot for them, and Washington is coming off a game when they almost lost to Ottawa, and they do have time off, so probably not the greatest spot for Pittsburgh, but Washington is down from minus 211 to minus 181, 73% of tickets, 63% of the cash on them. So the market indicators look like they are on the Pittsburgh side, driving the number down there on Washington. So that's kind of crazy to see as well. Vegas at Chicago. I mean, Vegas is a huge favorite, but I do think Vegas kind of in a bad spot because they're in a back-to-back as well. They played against Carolina yesterday and lost. Close game against Carolina, tough game, and now they're staying on the road. 3rd straight road game. I believe they're playing a 3rd game in 4 days as well. So this is a bad scheduling spot for them, man. 3rd game in 4 days. Or no, it's a 3rd game in 5 days, sorry. But still, 3rd straight game on the road there. Not good. Chicago, I mean, coming off that loss at Nashville, where tough loss, close loss for Chicago there. So I don't quite want to play this, but I do think that fading Vegas might make sense in this one. Vegas is up from minus 220 to 248. 67% of tickets and 94% of the cash on Vegas. So I don't love how that looks either. And then Edmonton and Vancouver. This is the last game we'll talk about here on the slate because I also have a play on Vancouver on the money line. I mean, Edmonton, we know what they're coming off of. They went into elevation. They were down 3-0 at Colorado, and they won the game anyway. And that was after beating Minnesota. They beat LA the game before that. 3 huge wins in a row. They're now playing a 3rd game in 4 days, all in different cities. A 4th game in 6 days, all in different cities. A 5th game in 8, all in different cities. And a 6th game in 10 days, all in different cities. And a 7th game in 12 days, all in different cities. That is insane. With 2 road trips going on, this is a ridiculous travel spot for Edmonton after that huge comeback against Colorado and beating teams that actually have better records than Vancouver does. I think you're going to see a tired Edmonton team coming into this one. So I don't like the spot for Edmonton here. I like it better for Vancouver. And Vancouver's record is bad enough now that it's possible that Edmonton kind of overlooks them. And Vancouver's coming off a couple ugly losses, 6-1 to Winnipeg and 5-1 to LA. They got to be in a bounce back spot here, man, after embarrassing losses like that, even though those were to good teams as well. But that LA one was a return home spot. So they were returning home from a road trip that took them all over the place, a long road trip. So I always say that return home spot is a lot of times a pretty bad spot. And it was. I think I mentioned that I leaned to the Kings in that one. So I think this is definitely a bounce back spot. When you have a bad performance in that first game home, you tend to bounce back, and that's in that second game back home. So give me Vancouver in this one. This one looks like Edmonton is up from -157 to -168. Try to get the best number you can, obviously, on Vancouver. But Edmonton is extremely public. 92% of the tickets and 96% of the cash on them. I don't know if I buy that cash disparity. I think it's a bad spot for Edmonton. Give me Vancouver plus money in that one. And then we'll move over to NBA. Not a whole lot going on here, but I do hesitate to like the Boston Celtics in this one, man. The Celtics, they're in a back-to-back, I think. They just blew out the Magic last night. So I think this is one of those spots where the Celtics might not have a good game here. They're down from 11 to 10, 54% of the tickets on them, 69% of the cash on the Hawks. So it may be a difficult spot for the Celtics here. Hawks are kind of in the middle of a little bit of momentum here, beating Chicago prior to coming into this. But again, Celtics on a back-to-back after a very satisfying and revenge blowout win over Orlando yesterday. So again, if I know the Celtics, even though I did get one of those Celtics games wrong recently, but still, or a couple of them maybe. But I think this is a spot where I would not want to play on the Celtics in this one. And then you got Indiana's laying 9.5 against Philly, up from 7.5 to 9.5, 76% of tickets, 90% of the cash. And that's because Paul George is injured right now, and it seems like that line is probably indicating he's not going to play, and Embiid is already out. So this Philadelphia team becoming an injured husk of themselves again, so just not good for Philadelphia, and that's why that line is as high as it is. I'm not going to touch that game. Golden State, I think, is in a bad spot. They just beat Minnesota, and they're returning home from a road trip. But the problem is, do I really want to put my money on Washington? I don't really, although they do have Boston up next too, which is a huge look ahead. And Boston does have that look ahead to Golden State up next as well. But I don't want to do it, even though it is a bad spot for the Warriors, sitting at 13.5, 81% of tickets, 90% of the cash on them. I don't quite want to do it. And then Cleveland, Minnesota, interesting. I mean, Cleveland's coming off that horrible loss to Oklahoma City. So it's like, do they bounce back from that, or do they get hung over from that because it was such a highly touted game and such a big, game that you get up emotionally for, and then you lose the game that badly? I could see it going both ways. And then Minnesota is on a back-to-back, and they just got revenge against the New York Knicks, their trade partner there with the KAT and Randall trade yesterday. So a huge win for Minnesota yesterday. So that puts both of those teams in a bad spot, man. So I don't want to touch it. Cleveland's sitting at a 6-point favorite, up a little bit with some juice. 76% of tickets and 73% of the cash on them. And that's really it. I don't have any plays there in NBA. And then NFL real quick, like I said, this is just difficult for me. I mean, you can go watch my NFL video. I don't know if I have anything else to say about this. My favorite NFL play today would be to play the over in the night game in Washington, Detroit, but I don't think I'm going to quite get there with that one. And I did say I lean to both favorites to win and cover, but who knows? That's going to do it for me, man. I'm Tower Gang Toad, of course. My plays one more time. College basketball, so many of them. Georgia plus 6.5. Texas Tech -4. Yale -8. Northern Kentucky -1.5. USC plus 1.5. Vandy plus 6.5. Mississippi State -6. I have no control. Arkansas plus 5.5. San Fran -3. Hockey, Columbus Blue Jackets, either plus money line or plus puck line, whatever you can get. And then Vancouver, probably plus money line on that one. That's going to do it. Tower Gang Toad on Twitter. Follow the Tower Gang Podcast. Patreon.com/Tower Gang. You get bonus content as well. Tower Gang, baby. And thanks, everybody, for hanging out. 2 hours again. Every Saturday is 2 hours now with college basketball and NHL and swing. Peace out, guys. Thanks for hanging out.